Behind the golden gates of Windsor Castle, a phone call at 3:47 a.m. would shatter the carefully constructed silence that had protected the royal family for months. Prince William's voice, steady despite the hour, delivered words that would echo through the corridors of power and reshape the very foundation of the monarchy's future. "The decision has been made," he said into the secure line, his fingers gripping the encrypted device that connected him directly to the Prime Minister's private residence. "There's no going back now." What happened in those crucial 48 hours that led to this moment? How did the heir to the throne arrive at a verdict so decisive it would send shockwaves through Buckingham Palace, Westminster, and beyond? The answer lies in a series of extraordinary events that began with a simple knock on William's door at Kensington Palace, carrying news that would force him to choose between family loyalty and the crown's survival. This is not just another royal scandal. This is the story of how Prince William stepped into his role as future king earlier than anyone expected, making the hardest decision of his life about his uncle Prince Andrew's fate. A decision that would either save the monarchy or tear it apart forever. The clock was ticking. The world was watching. And William knew that history would judge every choice he made in the days that followed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Kensington Palace as Prince William finished his daily run along the serpentine paths that had become his sanctuary. At 41, the future king had learned to find moments of peace wherever he could, especially as the weight of his destiny grew heavier with each passing year. Today, however, that peace would be shattered before he even reached the palace steps. His private secretary, James Morrison, stood waiting at the entrance, his usually composed expression betraying an urgency that made William's stomach tighten. In Morrison's hand was a manila folder marked with the highest security classification, the kind that arrived only when the monarchy itself faced existential threat. "Sir, we need to discuss this immediately," Morrison said, falling into step beside the prince as they moved through the palace's familiar corridors. "It concerns Prince Andrew." William's jaw tightened. His uncle's name had become synonymous with crisis management over the past several years, each mention requiring careful navigation through a minefield of legal complications and public relations disasters. What had started as whispered concerns had evolved into a full-blown constitutional crisis that threatened to engulf the entire royal family. The secure briefing room on the second floor had been swept for electronic surveillance just hours earlier, a routine precaution that had become anything but routine in recent months. As William settled into the leather chair that had once belonged to his grandfather, Prince Philip, Morrison opened the folder and spread its contents across the polished mahogany table. The documents painted a picture that was both damning and devastating. New evidence had emerged, witnesses had come forward, and the legal noose that had been slowly tightening around Prince Andrew was now threatening to snap shut with finality. But this wasn't just about Andrew anymore. The implications stretched far beyond one man's reputation. "The palace legal team has been in contact with the Attorney General's office," Morrison explained, his voice barely above a whisper despite the room's security. "There are indications that formal charges may be imminent. The Prime Minister's office has been briefed, and they're requesting an urgent meeting with Your Royal Highness." William studied the documents, his trained eye picking up details that would have escaped most observers. Years of preparation for kingship had taught him to read between lines, to understand the political undercurrents that shaped every royal decision. What he saw in these papers wasn't just evidence of wrongdoing, it was a roadmap to the monarchy's potential destruction. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the morning silence like a blade. Morrison answered with the careful protocol that governed all palace communications, his responses measured and professional. When he hung up, his face had grown even paler. "That was Sir Edward Young from Buckingham Palace," Morrison reported. "His Majesty requests your immediate presence. The Queen Consort will also be in attendance." The drive to Buckingham Palace took 23 minutes through London's morning traffic, each mile bringing William closer to a conversation he had been dreading for months. The black Jaguar moved smoothly through the capital's streets, its bulletproof windows offering a barrier between the future king and a world that was increasingly hostile to royal privilege. As they passed Westminster Abbey, where William had married Catherine 13 years earlier, he couldn't help but remember the optimism of that day. The crowds had cheered with genuine enthusiasm, believing in the monarchy's ability to modernize and remain relevant. Now, those same streets buzzed with protesters carrying signs demanding accountability and transparency from the very institution he would someday lead. Buckingham Palace loomed ahead, its familiar facade hiding the turmoil within. The sovereign's entrance opened smoothly as their vehicle approached, palace guards snapping to attention with the precision that had defined royal protocol for centuries. But William knew that protocol alone wouldn't be enough to navigate the crisis that awaited inside. King Charles III received his eldest son in the Oak Room, a space traditionally reserved for the monarchy's most sensitive discussions. The newly crowned monarch looked older than his 74 years, the weight of recent events having carved new lines into his weathered face. The Queen Consort, Camilla, sat beside him, her expression a carefully maintained mask of royal composure. "William," the king began, his voice carrying the measured authority that had defined his reign since his mother's death. "I assume you've been briefed on the latest developments regarding Andrew." The conversation that followed would later be described by palace insiders as the most difficult in the monarchy's modern history. Father and son, king and heir, grappled with questions that had no easy answers. How could they protect the institution they served while maintaining some semblance of justice? How could they balance family loyalty against public accountability? Andrew's situation had evolved from embarrassing inconvenience to existential threat. The evidence mounting against him wasn't just personal scandal, it represented a fundamental challenge to the monarchy's moral authority. Every day the situation remained unresolved was another day the crown's reputation suffered irreparable damage. "The public won't tolerate inaction much longer," Camilla observed, her words carrying the weight of someone who had navigated royal scandal from both inside and outside the family. "The media coverage is intensifying, and Parliament is asking increasingly pointed questions." William listened carefully, absorbing every nuance of the discussion. His role as heir apparent had always meant balancing present duty with future responsibility, but never had that balance felt so precarious. The decisions made in this room wouldn't just affect Andrew, they would define the monarchy William would inherit. The king's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Downing Street. The Prime Minister's office was requesting an emergency meeting, the kind of summons that historically preceded constitutional crises. The message was brief but unmistakable: the government's patience was exhausted. "They want a resolution within 72 hours, Charles said after reading the message. "The Attorney General is prepared to act with or without our cooperation." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. For centuries, the monarchy had operated under an unwritten understanding with Parliament and the legal system. The crown maintained its dignity and distance, while the government handled matters that might prove embarrassing or compromising. That understanding was now crumbling. William stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens, where tourists pressed against the fence hoping to glimpse royal life. These were the people who ultimately decided the monarchy's fate, not through votes or protests, but through the simple act of continued interest and respect. Their faith in the institution was eroding with each passing day that Andrew remained under the crown's protection. "I need to speak with him," William said finally, turning back to face his father. "Andrew needs to understand what's at stake here. This isn't just about him anymore." The king nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what his son was proposing. A direct confrontation between the heir apparent and the Duke of York would be unprecedented, but these were unprecedented times. The monarchy's survival might depend on William's ability to make Andrew see reason. As the afternoon wore on, plans were put in motion for a meeting that would determine not just Andrew's fate, but the future trajectory of the British crown. Palace staff moved with quiet efficiency, arranging transportation and security for a confrontation that could reshape the royal family forever. By evening, word had reached Windsor Castle that Prince William would be arriving the following morning for a private audience with Prince Andrew. The message was simple but loaded with implication: the future king was coming to deliver an ultimatum that would test the bonds of family against the demands of duty. The chess pieces were moving into position for a game that would determine whether the monarchy could survive its greatest crisis in generations. William knew that the next 24 hours would define his reign before it even began, forcing him to choose between the man he was raised to be and the king he was destined to become. As darkness fell over London, the future of the crown hung in the balance, waiting for a prince to become the king his country desperately needed. The morning mist clung to Windsor Castle's ancient stones as Prince William's convoy approached the imposing walls that had sheltered British royalty for nearly 1,000 years. The fortress that had witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties now prepared to host a confrontation that could determine whether the Windsor name would survive another generation of scandal. William had barely slept, spending the night reviewing legal documents and constitutional precedents that might guide the conversation ahead. His advisors had prepared briefing papers outlining various scenarios, but they all knew that family dynamics couldn't be reduced to bullet points and policy recommendations. This was about blood, loyalty, and the crushing weight of institutional survival. Prince Andrew was waiting in the grand reception room, a space where medieval kings had once received foreign dignitaries and signed treaties that shaped European history. Now it would host a different kind of negotiation, one that might prove equally consequential for the monarchy's future. The Duke of York looked every bit of his 63 years, the stress of recent months having taken a visible toll on the man who had once been celebrated as a war hero. His naval service in the Falklands had earned him genuine respect, but those achievements now seemed like distant memories overshadowed by allegations and investigations that had consumed his life. "William," Andrew said, rising from the gilt chair that had been positioned strategically beneath a portrait of Queen Victoria. The gesture was formal, almost ceremonial, acknowledging both their family relationship and the growing divide that separated them. The two men faced each other across a room that had witnessed 8 centuries of royal drama. William, tall and dignified in his navy suit, carried himself with the authority of someone who knew his destiny. Andrew, shorter and bearing the weight of his troubles, maintained the bearing of a man fighting for his survival. "Uncle Andrew," William replied, his tone carefully neutral. "Thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice." The pleasantries that followed were perfunctory, both men understanding that courtesy was merely a prelude to the real conversation. William had learned from his father that royal confrontations required careful orchestration, building toward difficult truths through layers of diplomatic language. But, as he studied his uncle's face, William realized that diplomacy might be a luxury they could no longer afford. The crisis had moved beyond the stage where gentle persuasion might work. The monarchy needed decisive action, even if it came at personal cost. "The situation has become untenable," William said, settling into the chair across from Andrew. "The legal implications are serious enough, but the constitutional crisis is what truly concerns me." Andrew's expression hardened. For years, he had maintained his innocence while watching his public role diminish to nothing. Stripped of military titles and royal patronages, he had become a ghost within his own family, present but powerless, protected but imprisoned by his royal status. "I've maintained my position throughout this ordeal," Andrew replied. "The allegations against me are false, and I've cooperated fully with every investigation." William pulled out a secure tablet containing the latest intelligence briefings. The information it contained wasn't just damaging, it was potentially catastrophic for the entire royal family. New witnesses had emerged with testimonies that corroborated existing allegations. Financial records had been uncovered that raised additional questions about Andrew's associations and activities. "The evidence is mounting," William said carefully. "Our legal advisors believe that criminal charges are inevitable. The question is whether the monarchy can survive the process." The conversation that followed revealed the full scope of the crisis facing the crown. Public opinion polls showed support for the monarchy at historic lows, with younger generations increasingly questioning the institution's relevance and moral authority. Parliament was facing pressure from constituents demanding accountability, while international allies were beginning to distance themselves from the royal family. Andrew listened as William outlined the stark realities they faced. The Duke of York's legal troubles had metastasized into something far more dangerous than personal scandal. They threatened to undermine the fundamental compact between the Crown and the British people, the unwritten agreement that legitimized royal authority in a democratic society. "What exactly are you proposing?" Andrew asked, his voice tight with controlled emotion. William hesitated for a moment, knowing that his next words would change everything between them. The proposal he was about to make had been developed in consultation with constitutional experts, legal scholars, and senior palace officials. It was carefully crafted to protect the monarchy while acknowledging the gravity of the situation. Complete separation from the royal family, William said quietly. Public renunciation of all titles, formal cooperation with legal proceedings, and permanent exile from royal duties and properties. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for hours rather than seconds. Andrew stared at his nephew with an expression that mixed shock, betrayal, and growing anger. The proposal wasn't just about removing him from public life, it was about severing connections that had defined his entire existence. "You're asking me to destroy myself," Andrew said finally. "To admit guilt for things I didn't do." "I'm asking you to save the institution we both serve," William replied. "The monarchy is bigger than any individual, including both of us." What followed was the most intense confrontation in recent royal history. Uncle and nephew argued about family loyalty, institutional duty, and the price of survival in an increasingly hostile world. Andrew accused William of abandoning him for political convenience. William accused Andrew of prioritizing personal interests over royal responsibility. The conversation revealed deep fractures within the royal family that had been hidden beneath layers of protocol and public ceremony. Years of resentment, competing loyalties, and philosophical differences about the monarchy's role came pouring out in words that could never be taken back. Andrew reminded William of family traditions that emphasized protecting members regardless of circumstances. The royal family had weathered scandals before by closing ranks and waiting for public attention to move elsewhere. Why should this situation be any different? William countered by pointing to the changed media landscape and public expectations. The internet had made royal privacy impossible to maintain. Social media had given critics platforms to organize and amplify their dissent. The monarchy could no longer rely on deference and discretion to manage crises. "Times have changed, Uncle," William said. "The old playbook doesn't work anymore." Their argument was interrupted by a knock on the door. A private secretary entered with an urgent message from Downing Street. The Prime Minister was scheduled to address Parliament within hours about the royal family's response to ongoing investigations. Government sources were suggesting that legislation might be introduced to formalize the relationship between the Crown and criminal justice system. The message underscored the urgency of their situation. Political pressure was building to levels that threatened constitutional stability. The government was preparing to act with or without royal cooperation, potentially creating precedents that could permanently alter the monarchy's status. Andrew read the message and sank back into his chair. The reality of his position was finally becoming clear. His legal troubles weren't just personal problems, they had become affairs of state that required governmental intervention. His choices were no longer his own to make. "How long do I have to decide?" he asked, his voice barely audible. 24 hours, William replied. "After that, the decision will be made for you." The ultimatum hung in the air between them, marking the end of one phase of their relationship and the beginning of something entirely different. William was no longer speaking as a nephew seeking family harmony, he was acting as the future king protecting his realm. As afternoon turned to evening, the two men continued their conversation with a new understanding of what was at stake. Andrew began to grasp the full implications of his situation, while William struggled with the personal cost of the position he had taken. The meeting concluded with no formal agreement, but both men understood that a line had been crossed. The private confrontation would soon become public knowledge, forcing Andrew to choose between voluntary exile and involuntary removal from the royal family. As William's convoy departed Windsor Castle, palace staff began preparing for the announcement that would reshape the monarchy's future. The next 24 hours would determine whether the crown could survive its greatest crisis by sacrificing one of its own. The secure phone line crackled with static as Prince William waited for confirmation from Downing Street. 23 hours had passed since his ultimatum to Prince Andrew, and the deadline was approaching with the inexorability of a tide. In the communications center beneath Kensington Palace, encrypted messages flowed between royal residences, government offices, and legal chambers as the machinery of constitutional crisis ground toward its resolution. William had spent the night in consultation with advisors whose expertise spanned centuries of royal protocol and modern crisis management. Constitutional lawyers had been summoned from their chambers, public relations specialists had crafted statements for multiple scenarios, and security experts had planned for every conceivable response to the announcement that would soon reshape the monarchy. At 7:43 a.m., the call came from Windsor Castle. Prince Andrew had made his decision. He's agreed to the terms, James Morrison reported after taking the encrypted communication. Complete severance from royal duties, cooperation with ongoing investigations, and permanent withdrawal from public life. The relief in the room was palpable but muted. Victory, if it could be called that, came at enormous personal cost to everyone involved. A family had been torn apart in service of institutional survival. The monarchy would endure, but the scars would remain for generations. William immediately contacted his father at Buckingham Palace. King Charles III had been awake since dawn, preparing for a conversation with the Prime Minister that would determine how the government would respond to the royal family's decision. The delicate balance between Crown and Parliament had never been more fragile. "He's made the right choice," the king said after William delivered the news. "History will judge us all harshly, but the institution must survive." The machinery of announcement began moving with practiced efficiency. Palace press officers crafted carefully worded statements that acknowledged Andrew's withdrawal while maintaining royal dignity. Legal teams coordinated with prosecutors to ensure smooth cooperation with ongoing investigations. Security services prepared for public reactions that could range from celebration to outrage. By mid-morning, senior staff from across the royal household had gathered at Buckingham Palace for the final briefing before the announcement. The assembled advisors represented decades of institutional memory and expertise, but none had navigated a crisis quite like this one. They were writing the playbook as they implemented it. The statement that emerged from their deliberations was a masterpiece of diplomatic language. It acknowledged Prince Andrew's decision to withdraw from public life while emphasizing the royal family's commitment to cooperation with legal authorities. Most importantly, it positioned the monarchy as responsive to public concerns while maintaining constitutional dignity. But, behind the careful phrases lay a human tragedy that would echo through royal history. A war hero had been cast out from his family to save the institution he had served. Brothers had chosen duty over blood. The price of institutional survival had been measured in personal relationships that could never be restored. At precisely 2 p.m., the announcement was released simultaneously to major news outlets, government offices, and diplomatic missions around the world. The carefully coordinated release was designed to control the narrative and minimize speculation about the decision-making process that had led to this moment. The response was immediate and global. News networks interrupted regular programming to report on the unprecedented royal announcement. Social media platforms exploded with commentary ranging from praise for royal accountability to criticism of family betrayal. International allies issued carefully neutral statements acknowledging the British royal family's decision. In Parliament, the Prime Minister rose to address the House of Commons with a statement that had been coordinated with palace officials throughout the morning. The government's response balanced respect for royal decision-making with emphasis on legal equality and democratic accountability. "The Crown has demonstrated its commitment to the rule of law," the Prime Minister declared. "No one is above legal scrutiny, and this decision reflects the values that define our constitutional democracy." The parliamentary response revealed the delicate constitutional balance that had been preserved through the crisis. The monarchy had acted before being forced to act, maintaining the appearance of voluntary cooperation while acknowledging governmental authority. The precedent established would influence royal conduct for generations to come. Meanwhile, Prince Andrew was already in the process of leaving Windsor Castle for the last time as a working member of the royal family. His departure was coordinated with military precision, reflecting both security concerns and the need for dignified withdrawal from royal life. The man who had once been fourth in line to the throne was beginning a journey into permanent exile from the institution that had defined his existence. William watched the departure from his office at Kensington Palace, understanding that he was witnessing the end of an era. The royal family that had shaped his childhood was being fundamentally transformed by decisions he had helped orchestrate. The weight of future kingship had never felt heavier. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, entered the office as the last news bulletins confirmed Andrew's departure from royal properties. She had been briefed on the situation's evolution but had watched from a distance as her husband navigated the most difficult decision of his royal career. "How are you feeling?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. William considered the question carefully. Relief mixed with sadness, satisfaction with regret. The monarchy had been saved, but the cost had been enormous. Family relationships had been sacrificed for institutional survival. The precedent established would influence how future crises were handled. "Like I'd become king before my time," he replied finally. The afternoon brought a succession of briefings and meetings as the royal household adapted to its new reality. Prince Andrew's offices were closed, his staff reassigned, and his official duties redistributed among remaining senior royals. The process was handled with characteristic royal efficiency, but everyone involved understood they were witnessing history. International reactions arrived throughout the day, revealing the global implications of the decision. Commonwealth nations issued statements supporting the royal family's commitment to accountability. European monarchies privately expressed relief that the crisis had been resolved without constitutional disruption. American officials praised the demonstration of democratic values. By evening, public opinion polls were already showing improved support for the monarchy among younger demographics. The decisive action had resonated with citizens who had grown frustrated with institutional protection of scandal-ridden members. The gamble had paid off politically, even as it had cost enormously personally. King Charles III hosted a private dinner for senior family members at Buckingham Palace that evening. The gathering was ostensibly to review the day's events, but everyone present understood it was also a wake for the royal family they had known. Andrew's empty chair served as a silent reminder of the price they had paid for institutional survival. The conversation around the dinner table revealed the emotional complexity of their situation. Relief that the crisis had been resolved mixed with grief for the family member they had lost. Pride in the monarchy's survival competed with sadness about the methods required to ensure it. William found himself reflecting on the lessons his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, had taught him about duty and sacrifice. The late Queen had navigated numerous family crises during her 70-year reign, but none had required such decisive action against a family member. He wondered what she would have thought of the decision to exile Andrew. As midnight approached, William stood at the window of his Kensington Palace study, looking out over London's glittering skyline. The city he would someday rule as king continued its life largely unaware of the personal dramas that had played out within palace walls. The monarchy had survived another crisis, but he understood that the institution he would inherit had been permanently changed by the events of recent days. The secure phone on his desk rang one final time, carrying the last status report of a day that had transformed the British royal family. Palace security confirmed that all family members were safe in their residences. Government liaisons reported satisfaction with the day's coordination. Legal teams confirmed that cooperation protocols had been established for ongoing investigations. The crisis was over, but its consequences would echo through generations of royal history. Prince William had proven himself capable of making the hardest decisions required of future kingship. The monarchy had demonstrated its ability to reform itself when survival demanded sacrifice. In the days that followed, the royal family would begin rebuilding their public image and personal relationships. New protocols would be established for handling future crises. The precedent of accountability would become part of royal tradition. But, for now, in the quiet hours after the storm, Prince William sat alone with the weight of decisions that had saved his throne and cost his family. The prince who had awakened to crisis had ended the day as the uncrowned king his country needed him to become.